In this sketch, I'm going to show you how to do a barbecue in a home oven. I know that sounds pretty unlikely, but it's true. It will work. There are a few tricks. I'm going to show them to you, and things are going to turn out pretty well for you.
Oh my God.
It's like a miracle.
First up, let's have a look at the sort of things you're likely to encounter at your supermarket. This here is a brisket flat. It's been close trimmed and there isn't enough fat on it to protect it in the oven. So I wouldn't recommend using something like this, but it's a very good example of what you're likely to find at your local supermarket. Part of it is much too thin. This is going to turn into beef jerky. This is a whole brisket. It consists of the point, which is this section here. It's a little bit to the front, and it's on top, so to speak. And you can see that it's got wonderful fat in it. I'm going to turn it over, and you can see that that wonderful fat extends throughout it. And this is the flat under here. We're going to use the flat to make a little barbecue. Because we're going to cut it up ourselves, we're going to leave enough fat on the surface to protect it in the oven. So it's not going to dry out the way this one here would do. Now separate the two pieces. If the flat looks a bit thin to you, leave some of the point behind. Now you need to establish a meat side. So clear the fat from that side. That's the side the point was against. Now continue trimming until you've got a fairly clean meat side. Now let's look at what we have here. We have one flat. This is the meat side. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But what's really important here, there's the fat side. And you've got a good protective layer of fat on here, and that's going to keep it nice and moist and juicy in the oven. Here's the point. It's beautifully involved with collagen and with fat, and the best way to cook that is very slowly in barely simmering water. So we're going to make corned beef with the point, and we're going to make barbecue with the flat. There's a lot of waste here. We have meaty bits, we have fatty bits. They're both very good. Don't throw either of them away. The meaty bits are really good for hamburger or for meatloaf or anything along those lines. The fatty bits, they're very good too. The fat around the plate area tends to be very flaky and dry. And you can chop it up into sausages. You can grind it up into hamburgers. Anything that's not going to cook for a very long time. Now when you get close to the meat, it does become stringy. And that sort of fat you don't want to put in something that's going to be cooked lightly, like a sausage or a hamburger. You want to put that in your spag bowl or meatballs or something like that where you want to simmer it for a long time. Your knife is going to tell you what kind of fat you're in, so separate it. Got that dry, flaky fat from the outside of the brisket. Save that especially for hamburgers and sausages. You will never regret it. It's beautiful stuff. Now let's get ready to do our oven barbecue. As you can see, there are a few odd bits here. Just whack them off with a knife. Try to get a fairly round shape. You can see that it's not quite round. Let's whack that off there and whack that off there. And put these scraps in your hamburger pile. That's excellent. Just a little bit here. I think that's too thin. That would dry out in the oven. So whack that off as well. A little corner here. Let's round that off. And now the brisket flat is ready for us to prep. The first thing you have to do is season it. For that, we use the dry rub. Just sprinkle it on a little at a time. You don't want to try to pack it on all at once. The salt will bring a little moisture to the surface, and that will give the rub something to stick to. So you can add it several times. As you can see, this is moist here, so we can add a little bit more and it will stick. Now it's called rub. Obviously you don't rub it on, you just pat it on. Just continue in this manner until it's nicely coated, using an amount that you think is appropriate. You'll notice that the meat side here is going to be exposed to the heat of the oven. And that's an opportunity for it to dry out terribly. So what we have to do is protect that meat from the heat of the oven using gelatin. And that is going to duplicate the effect of the smoke that we would have if we were really barbecuing. So to begin, take a package of unflavored gelatin and dissolve it in 8 or 10 ounces of warm water. Now to that you might want to add a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons of the dry rub to give it a little extra flavor. And, a little secret, a trick. It's not a cheap trick, it actually works. A little liquid smoke. Maybe a tablespoon or 2. I have this on a rack above a sheet pan lined with foil. But we don't want to put it into the oven that way exactly. What you want to do is turn the meat side up, put this rack on an oven rack, and put the sheet pan on an oven rack several inches below. That way, hot air will circulate around the meat, and it will cook evenly. This has been cooking for about 30 minutes now. Notice the placement of the meat and the drip pan. Now we dab on the gelatin here on the meat side of the brisket flat. Don't wipe it on, just dab it on gently so that you don't disturb the dry rub underneath it. You'll apply this every 15 minutes if you have a small brisket that you're doing at a higher temperature, or every 30 minutes if you're doing a very large one at a very low temperature. When each coat of this gelatin dries, add another coat. Now the brisket has been cooking for about an hour and a half. And for a brisket this size, I reckon that to be about 1/3 of the cooking time. I've used up about 2/3 of the gelatin. It's time to turn it fat side up. And we'll keep it fat side up for the remainder of the cooking. I would expect a brisket this size to cook for 4.5 to 5 hours total. You've got a little gelatin remaining. Go ahead and paint the fat side with it occasionally until you've used it up. It stays like this for the remainder of the cooking. You don't need to rotate it or turn it because you've got plenty of air circulating around. At this point, you might consider putting some water in the drip pan to help keep the air inside the oven moist. All right, let's see what we've accomplished here. It certainly looks like a nice piece of barbecue. As you can see, it's shrunk quite a bit. That's absolutely normal. Let's see if it's juicy. I think that should be pretty juicy. It certainly is. Oh, look at that. Check that out. That's beautiful. Now let's go ahead and turn it about so that we can cut it across the grain into pieces that are good for serving. You've got a little dry crust. That's great. Everybody loves that. Let's go right through there, cutting across the grain. Oh man, that is beautiful. This is the dry end. Even it should be pretty juicy. I'm going to dip it in the sauce. Let's see how we did. It's tender, but it's not falling apart. It's actually perfect in my opinion. I wouldn't want it to have any less texture than this. If you like it really well done, that's fine with me. But remember, it's going to be dry if you do that. This way you preserve the natural moisture in the meat. You don't need to rely on the sauce so much. Now, how might we want to serve this? Right on a plate with a little splash of sauce would be fine. A lot of people like to make sandwiches. I'm going to show you one that I like. Now for a little sauce. This is very important. This has a lot of smoke flavor from the smoked ingredients that we've added to it, and this will make the barbecue taste exactly like barbecue. As you can see, it's not terribly thick. It should be more of a light gravy, a glaze. I don't like gloppy, heavy barbecue sauce like ketchup. And then one of my favorite accompaniments is also one of my favorite toppings. I like a little coleslaw with my barbecue. I also like it on my barbecue sandwich. I think that the cool, refreshing coleslaw is a nice contrast with the warm and meat and the hot spices. And so let's see how this turns out. Oh God, that is so good. You've got to try this. It isn't exactly barbecue, but it is so close in texture and flavor. Your friends, your family are going to love it. Give it a try. You can do it at home, even if you're an apartment dweller, in an ordinary oven. It can be done. Cheers.